Okay. All right. Hey there, folks. Even with conventions, readings, and other author type events back in action, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster, season 9, intriguing interviews with creative minds. So now that we've actually been back and the world's come back, the question is, for those of us in the writing community, and in particular in the sci-fi fantasy community, has the publishing industry come back? Does it look and function the way it did pre-pandemic? Or have real world conditions changed? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight as we dive into Writer Relaunch, getting genre fiction published in a post-pandemic world. And to help us deconstruct what's going on here, please welcome back my pal and fellow Crazy 8 Press inmate, AARON ROSENBERG. AARON is an award-winning #1 best-selling author across multiple genres, has written original novels and short stories, tie-in fiction, children's books, educational books, role-playing games, and God knows what else. Is a founding member of Crazy 8 Press. Welcome back, AARON.
Thanks. Good to be back.
All right. Also on our panel is RANDEE DAWN. RANDEE is an entertainment journalist for Variety, the LA Times, Emmy Magazine, and Today.com, is co-author of Law & Order, the Unofficial Companion, and she is also the author of her debut novel, Tune In Tomorrow, about a fantastical TV reality show. Welcome, RANDEE.
Thanks for having me. Oh, by the way, it's Law & Order SVU, Unofficial Companion.
SVU, okay. All right.
That might have been my typo.
All right, fair enough. Okay. And rounding out our panel is my pal, Alex Shvartsman. Alex is the award-winning author of 120 short stories. I mean, Alex, come on. You're slipping here, pal. Get to work. He's published in Analog, Nature, Strange Horizons, and elsewhere. He is also the editor of more than a dozen anthologies, including the long-running Unidentified Funny Objects series, and is the editor-in-chief of Future Science Fiction Digest. Also, Alex is the author of the fantasy political novel Iridian's Crown and the magical urban fantasy The Middling Affliction. Welcome back, Alex.
Hey, thank you for having me again.
All right. Okay, just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send notes or questions you have to the panel during the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so before we kind of really dive into the publishing world, I want to just take a step back for a minute and talk about kind of where your head's at in terms of your writing. So the pandemic affected everyone differently and to varying degrees. You know, as writers, it can be a real challenge to be creative during unusually stressful times, while others use that stress as a motivator or a distraction. Several writers that I've spoken to over the last few years, and these include numerous best-selling and award-winning authors, international bestsellers, have told me that they had a very difficult time writing during the pandemic, and some of them couldn't do it at all. Meanwhile, others were not affected and they were able to kind of really dive in. Like in my case, it didn't slow me down, but that anxiety definitely found its way into my writing. So my question, and it's really a two-part question, is this. And part one is, how, if at all, did the pandemic affect you creatively? And then two, now that the worst of the pandemic is behind us, kind of where's your writer brain at now? And we'll start with Alex.
So I feel like a horrendous human being saying this, but the pandemic has been great for my writing.
Well, you are a horrible human being, so you know, that's why we had you on the show.
I mean, you know, it's a given. We'll just start with that, so we don't have to argue at that point. So for me, I'm a very, very lazy individual, and so forcing me into an enclosed space that I can't really leave, in front of the computer where I can't go to work, I can't go hang out with my friends or do anything else, and all there is me and the keyboard, that was the best possible thing that could have happened in terms of my productivity. I did just a ton of work, writing, translating. I've never had better word counts than in the early months of the pandemic. And now that things are getting back to normal and the schedules for everyone, myself included, they're getting back to normal, my word count is receding a little bit, but I did carry those lessons. I kind of learned to write faster, learned to be more productive, and I am trying to hang on to those gains for dear life. So whether or not that I've succeeded, time shall tell. But again, there's all these terrible things that we can say about the last couple of years, and I always try to view things as a glass at least a little bit full kind of guy. So I see, I see the positive, and at least in that I was able to get all that stuff out onto the page that exists now.
So
So
let
that
me-
this is why Alex is my brother from another mother, because like I'm totally in that headspace also. Sorry to interrupt. I got the impression we were just supposed to leap on in here. So here I am. But yeah, with what Alex was saying, I mean, I actually wrote a whole essay about this for Blackgate magazine, that the pandemic was actually really good for my writing, which is again a terrible, terrible thing you're supposed to say. There's supposed to be nothing good that came out of the pandemic. And I don't even like to say that this was necessarily out of the pandemic. I was already working from home. I was already kind of in this enclosed space that I was traditionally going to be writing from anyway, but the freelance work dialed down. Things were just quieter. There was nowhere to go in the evenings. You didn't have a lot of options to do other things that you might have had otherwise. And I personally did a whole, I think 2 different drafts of a novel that has not been published and has not gotten past that point at this point yet. But I got a lot of writing done during the pandemic because I felt it was a great way to escape into a world that I could create, that I had some control over, and that I could see an accomplishment by adding on more words and adding on more chapters and everything. So yeah, I got a whole novel and 2 drafts done. Plus, and we can get into this later, but my book Tune In Tomorrow, I got the note from my agent on March 13th, 2020, that Solaris wanted to buy it. And then of course, everything in New York shut down the next day. So the story of the pandemic for me was, it was like a plus and a minus. It was a long, slow slog through the contract process. And are they going to really buy it? Is something also going to happen that maybe everything will go out of business? Who knows? But the best part of it was that I could sort of soldier my way through this bleak time, knowing that somebody wanted my novel, and there was a very good chance I was actually going to get a novel published. So it was kind of empowering at the same time. So for me, that whole setup really, really worked well with my creative process, and in the end, my publishing progress.
So, Aaron, I mean, I already know the answer. I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it to you anyway. So again, so during those rough years, what was it like for you, just from a creativity standpoint?
Yeah, so it didn't really affect my productivity one way or the other. I mean, I average 350 to 400,000 words a year. I continued to do that. I did, something like 8 novels and 35 short stories over the course of the lockdown. The only real difference for me was, and it did take a little adjustment, which was that this space where I am right now, is in our basement. It's my corner of our basement, which is my office space, and at my computer. And this was my dedicated writing space. But when we went into lockdown in March of 2020, this became my workspace. And what that meant, I discovered very quickly, is that I couldn't write here, because at 5 o'clock at night, when I finished work for the day, I needed to get out of this space. And fortunately, we have a house, so we have 3 floors. So I would be down here during the day. The kids would be in the living room and in their room respectively. Jen, my wife, would be upstairs in our room. So we'd be spread out throughout the day, each doing our own work. And then at 5 o'clock, I had to leave this space. So for the first week or so, I couldn't write. And then I was like, well, wait, I have a laptop and we have a living room and I have a couch. So that became my writing space. And once I transitioned to that, I was able to pick up without a problem and just, continue going as usual. And it was good because it gave me the different perspective. So I was able to get up, move to a different space, be in a different posture, things like that. It's actually been sort of a process in reverse now, because once I went back to work in the office, which was last September, not this past September, September 4, this became available to be my writing space again. But now I have 2 writing spaces, and I can actually alternate back and forth. So sometimes I feel like writing in the living room, sometimes I feel like writing down here. So I kind of have, twice as many options, which is really good. But yeah, as far as the stories, I mean, yeah, you know what I'm like. So I just kind of kept plugging.
Yeah, I know. We keep you around anyway, but
Yeah,
there you go. I mean, this whole studio was not there was never any plan for this. This space was supposed to really be for my kids. I
Right.
have for the folks who don't know, I have 12-year-old twins, my ninjas, and it was really, we were going to I was going to have a desk down here, and this was going to be their like play space, but I had to be down here to work. And then it just sort of like slowly but surely I kind of took over, but it was never the plan. I never really wanted to do that. And it just kind of happened anyway. So, and from a productivity standpoint, the four of us seem to have done fairly well. And I want to be clear for everyone who's watching out there or is going to watch later. If you were one of those writers who could not write or struggle to write, that is completely understandable. There's no judgment about anyone who struggled. Everybody dealt with this pandemic differently. It was, we all saw the horrible effects it had on people, the anxiety, the stress, the uncertainty. I mean, let's not just pretend it wasn't just a pandemic. It was a pandemic during the Trump years. I mean, supervillain said, hey, what factors could I put together to destroy the world? I don't know that you could have done worse than what we got. So if you couldn't function that well, totally understood. So maybe we're just anomalies, maybe we're not, I don't know. But in any case, the other question that I wanted to dive into a little bit was, during those tough years, did that anxiety, the stress and the uncertainty, because none of us knew what was going to happen, did you find that energy, did it find its way into your writing? Did you find yourself, just kind of like, was it therapeutic? Was it cathartic to sort of just be able to get things out on page that were bottled up inside? Or was it more just, my inner world is here and I don't even want to think about it. I'm going to go someplace that's far, far away. What do you guys think? Alex, what about you? What did you do with that energy?
For me, it's difficult to harness the anxiety and the negative emotions because I write mostly snarky and funny stuff.
Right. I know. That's why I'm kind of curious.
The fact of the matter is that in these kind of times, that's when people really need that as much as ever. And so it's always been my defense mechanism. And I guess that's probably true for a lot of us who somehow ended up being writers. Or
stop. We don't crack jokes here. It's not what we do.
Some better than others, but yes.
Oh, touche.
Ah.
Touche.
You started it.
Okay, hold on. I think the mute button's around here somewhere.
So I had to, I had to just lean into that defense mechanism and continue to sort of generate something funny and light and positive. And, it works, like being able to revert into that no matter what's going on around you, what's going on like just a few steps outside your door. And it was also a skill, like I mentioned earlier in the first segment, is that I had to learn a lot of these skills of writing faster, being more productive. And I think that was part of it, is a kind of a life lesson in making lemonade out of all those lemons that the pandemic was throwing at us.
Yeah. I also find, talking about writing fast, we should just black out Aaron, because he's not even human. He's some sort of automated beast. So you don't get to talk about right now about how fast you go. I definitely found that my writing pace accelerated as well. Because I just felt like I had to do something with all this energy that I had. I got to put it somewhere, and it really kind of drove me. But tonally, I found that while you went lighter and stayed lighter, I kind of leaned in a little bit more to I let my anxiety come out on the page. I mean, everyone knows somebody who didn't do well really did poorly during this time. And I have people in my world who really didn't do well, and it was difficult not to be able to help them. So to be able to put that sense of anger and frustration and uncertainty and all that other stuff and rage and who do you blame for all this, I put that onto the page. Randy, what about you?
So there was actually, I was thinking as you all were talking, it reminded me that I actually also wrote 2 short stories for anthologies, one of which was extremely dark for horror. It's in this anthology, Even in the Grave, that's all about, it's all ghost stories, but mine kind of actually gets a little grosser than average. And there was a reference that I put in there. It sort of came out organically, but then when I put it out on the page, was like, okay, I can see why this pandemic is affecting me. And there was a reference in the beginning there to, some sort of plague that's sweeping across the land, and people are having to stay indoors and all. It's a relatively small part of things. But the other thing that I wanted to address was, this was the pandemic was sort of the culmination of a rethinking I think I had for telling stories in general. I used to very much be of the side that if enough of these stories were written in which we had really strong figures of diversity and really strong progressive sort of stories and characters and all of that, that eventually we could actually change the world in a way. You could change society. You could have people say, oh, these characters did this in the story. I understand the world a little better. And the fact is that after the election of 45, and then the pandemic on top of it, and all of the really nutty stuff that came out of the whole pandemic, and the things that people started to believe, I really just began to feel like there was nothing that was ever going to change people, whether you had great TV or movies or art or books. And that was really depressing for me, because I thought, why bother in that case? But then I kind of flipped it around a little bit and thought, well, that actually kind of frees me up, because I can now write anything. I can just completely turn this around and try, and not necessarily feel like I have to write to something, but just tell the story I want to tell. And it doesn't matter if it sounds like anything else, or if it reflects something that I've already believed in the past. So I can't say I've fully made that transition, but I have to say it really put a dent in my belief that art can make a difference, because I grew up, like many of us probably here in this room, watching something like Sesame Street, which really should have changed hearts and minds as we were young and growing up, and we are still surrounded by the same bullshit that was existing in the 70s and 60s and 50s a lot of the time. So that's me.
All right. So as we get a little deeper into the discussion, I just want to clarify that for the purpose of this panel, we're going to be focusing more so on the sci-fi fantasy genre publishing, since that's the space that the four of us spend the most of our time in, which doesn't mean that feedback about other genres isn't welcome, but just for clarification purposes. All right. So the publishing ecosystem, if you break it down into parts, essentially has three core sides of the triangle, right? You've got what the readers want to read, what the writers want to write, and then what the publishers are willing to publish, right? So, and there's all this kind of push-pull here. So Aaron and I actually were at a convention just a couple of weeks ago. And Aaron, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. We were talking to one of our most supportive fans who buys pretty much, because Aaron and I were at our Crazy 8 press table, and this guy buys pretty much everything we write. God bless him. But one of the things that he was saying to us, and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing anything here, is that he loves buying books directly from us. And what I mean, kind of in person rather than, going to a bookstore or online, for two main reasons. And one was that he loves the one-on-one interaction. He likes to be able to stand in front of us, and we can sign the books and we can talk about it and kind of get into it. And also he said that in particular, he likes the books that we write because we're not cookie cutter, and we're willing to write books that take him places that he doesn't always find in more, let's just call, mainstream fiction. Now, that preamble aside, now that we're back out in the world, we're going back to cons. I know Alex was saying offline is excited to kind of finally get back out there, dealing with fans, working with publishers. What I want to know is, what are you hearing? What are folks telling you about A, what they want to read, and B, if the publishers themselves are backing what the fans say that they want? So Randy, since you were just, I want to hear a little bit more about, you've been out there a couple of times. What are you hearing? What's the chatter?
I really don't know that I have a great answer for you here, because I've been very focused on the one book that I have. And so I'm talking to people about my specific book. If my book is any example, people seem to really want funny fiction. So this is good. I think the escape mechanism is still necessary. I think Alex referred to this earlier. We need lighthearted and amusing things more than ever now, because things can be very dark outside. In terms of what publishing wants, I wish I had that answer, honestly. You know, everybody has their own unique publishing story. And from what I can tell, a lot of what is still out there is the same stuff that they've wanted in the past. I don't know that things have radically changed in terms of what they want. The main problem is I don't think publishers have a really good idea how to sell anything anymore. They sort of abandoned the marketing to the authors, which fine. I am, I guess, my book's best advocate, but I have a limited.
Okay, hold on to that.
We'll get into that. Yeah.
I have that. That's you're
Okay.
You're jumping the queue in the questions here, but we're definitely going to get to that.
Okay.
All right, Aaron, you know, you've been on multiple sides for a long time of the publishing, you know, ecosystem. So last couple of years, you know, and you know lots of folks. What are you hearing? What are the readers telling you? What are other publishers telling you? What's, you know, to the best that you can ascertain right now, what do you think what's the state of affairs?
So right now, I mean, what I hear most from other publishers is concern, right? Because just like you were saying with this podcast, I mean, you know, we had a couple of years where, you know, let's be honest, it's kind of like Alex was saying, you know, you don't want to say good things about a pandemic. But for small press and indie publishers, the pandemic was kind of a good thing in a way, because there wasn't as much competition, right? Because the big publishers were struggling to get their things through, and the small presses, you know, the one-man crews, the two-man crews, things like that, working out of their homes already. You know, it wasn't as big of a problem in some ways. And, you know, I think that people were very eager to get materials to read, very eager to have these escape mechanisms, you know, which is certainly the way I approach the writing too. You know, and so now that things are shifting back, now that the world has opened back up again to a degree and things like that, I think a lot of small presses are worrying. I mean, you and I saw this at the shows.
Yep.
You know, people are worrying because, like, the first show that I went to after things started opening back up was unbelievably successful. Like, everybody that I knew pretty much sold out of everything because people were so excited. It'd been 2 years since we'd been in person able to buy a book from somebody. So people were running up and practically throwing money at us. It's the closest to being a rock star we'll ever get. You know, now things have slowed back down a little bit. You know, now there are more options available again. Plus, that first blush has faded again. And obviously there are money concerns for a lot of people. So people have to be more careful.
That's right.
So I think, you know, the small presses in particular are worrying about whether, you know, that peak is now going to drop drastically and really, really hurt them. And at the same time, of course, the big publishers are now ramping back up and saying, all right, you know, time to roll up our sleeves and get back into it and get the people back into our books, you know, because they have such a long arm and such a long publishing process, you know, that they've had to sort of slow that down for a bit. And now they're trying to kick it back up. So, you know, I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of trepidation about what's going to happen next and where things are going to go.
And we're also seeing, and I know, Aaron, we were talking about this with Bob just the other day, and you see it everywhere. The price of paper has gone up considerably. The supply chain has issues. There are delivery delays constantly. The cost of everything is just tougher, you know. So I want to kind of, we're going to go back. We're actually going to go back a little bit. And this one, I'm going to start with Alex, but just let me get through the question. So fads come and go, but generally speaking, fiction in all form tends to reflect the feelings, the attitudes, and cultural shifts about what's going on in the real world. And we've all lived through, as we said, this Trumpian COVID dystopia for the last really 6 years or so, and a lot of fiction in all mediums. And I'm not saying everything, but a lot of fiction went fairly dark, especially during those first, 18, 24 months. But here, you three tend to write, although not exclusively, although Alex mostly, lighter and comedy series. I have my own sci-fi comedy series. We'll talk about that later. Are you finding now, and Alex, Alex and Randy, you both kind of alluded to this, but are you finding now that today, post-pandemic, that, again, generally speaking, that appetites of fans are still running fairly dark? Or is there sort of a dark fatigue that's setting in with desires for lighter, funnier, and more adventurous fare? So Alex, I'll start with you.
So I have to argue a little bit with the fundamental premise of the question. I think that I don't necessarily see the trend as more people being interested in dark fiction or more people being interested in humor or any particular subgenre. We do see those kind of spikes, but those spikes are usually generated by a huge mega hit, like The Martian coming out, and then people writing like sort of much harder sci-fi, but with a snarky bend. Those are the things that drive, that drive like certain subgenres. Overall, though, I feel as though the entire genre, the entire field is either growing or, and expanding, or it's contracting. So we did experience a very weird fluctuation during the pandemic, and Aaron talked a little bit about the smaller presses and the benefits and the boons that they experienced. But not all small presses even made out well, because what we saw at the beginning of a pandemic, people stopped commuting to work. And what does that mean? Nobody was buying audiobooks. We found very quickly that a lot of people are just not listening to audiobooks at home. They were always consuming them during their commute. So the audiobook sales dropped. The ebook sales and some of the lines that are just sort of like cheaper, fast, quick reading, something that you would enjoy on the train, those sales temporarily dropped. And I think that the people that I've talked to at least saw those things recover over time. Whereas with traditional publishing, they experienced all the issues that you've covered, the supply chain issues, the paper, everything else. But they also had a much bigger catalog, longer, more money in the bank, so they could weather the pandemic as well. So everybody kind of suffered collectively a little bit, but I do think that things are kind of on the rise again. The supply chain issues have mostly resolved themselves. Yes, paper is more expensive, but because everything else is going up in price, it's a good time for publishers and for independent authors to raise the price of their books a little bit, because we've got so used to being at like the $2.99, $3.99 price point, and now even the small press and self-published books are going to $5.99, $6.99, $7.99. And not seeing as much pushbacks as they may have previously. So I think that it's not about, hey, everybody just decides, we're going to want to read dark fiction right now. Dark fiction has been popular through good times and bad. And I would even say that dark fiction is better in the good times, because you tend to want to tickle your sort of like...
That's right. Yes, right? I 100% agree with you that almost always that's true. Like when things are really bad, we'll say, oh, let's go find some escapism. And when things are good, oh, I want to scratch that dark itch. Right. But this was just such an anomaly, right? It was basically, like a nuclear bomb kind of went off for a couple of years, and it just freaked us out in ways that none of us had ever experienced. So it was not just a spike, but I would argue like an atomic spike of, anxiety. And it has kind of, fluttered down, but we're going to be feeling the ramifications probably for generations. But I agree that the peak of it is certainly past.
Here's another factor, and I'll shut up after that, let somebody else talk.
Keep going.
Unlike the small presses and the self-published people, in traditional publishing, you got a 2 to 3 year cycle. So from them accepting the book and the acquisitions editor buying the book, and the book actually coming out in the paperback, what Randy was talking about, her book was accepted right going into the pandemic and came out pretty much at the tail end of it. So we really haven't seen, like they wouldn't have reacted. They wouldn't have had time to react. And the traditional publisher would know this and wouldn't necessarily try and publish the books that are good specifically in the pandemic. I think they would have taken the longer view, because I doubt anybody expected it to last for like 3 to 5 years.
The big publishers also don't have there's the issue of that 2 to 3 year cycle, right? Because they've got backlogs sitting right now. So even if a big publisher wants to shift, even if they're looking at it and saying, what, people are done with whatever it is, let's pivot to something else. They can't pivot in the same way that a small press can. They bought all these books already. They're not going to throw them away. They're going to try to get their money out of them by putting those books out, doing the best they can to actually market them and get people interested in them. Whether that succeeds or not, is anybody's guess. But one of the things I think has happened is that, I think that we see that spike, right? And we saw so many people saying, oh, I want lighter, I want happier. I want something to take my mind off the pandemic. Even if that initial impulse has fallen down, there are going to be plenty of people, and we've seen this already at some of the cons and things, who, because they picked up that first book, are now saying, you know what, I like this kind of writing, right? Maybe they didn't read the lighter, funnier stuff before the pandemic, but now they have a taste for it. And so even if things are starting to improve for them, around them, et cetera, they've discovered this kind of writing. So, so there's still going to be, I think, some sales in that regard, where they're not immediately just going to go, oh, you know what, yeah, I'm back to normal now with friends and things, so I can go right back to reading dark fiction. They'll probably mix and match more,
Right. And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to echo the idea that, the publishing industry is a very large ship, and it just takes a long time to turn that ship around in any particular direction. And I think that they don't necessarily try to react instantly, because they understand that you can't, if you have a trend today, you can't have a book out tomorrow that does it. And I was just looking at the list of, for example, of the books that were the best selling books of 2022. And that doesn't necessarily reflect the indie industry. But if you're looking for what's light or what's dark or what people are picking up, I mean, Colleen Hoover, who nobody had really heard of before prior to about 2022, ends up with like 5 or 6 books on the best selling books of the year. And she writes these sort of, I mean, some people may love her, but it's really kind of somewhere between romance novel and fanfic. I mean, it's not really very well done, but it's super melodramatic, a lot of emotion, a lot of romance, a lot of weird relationships, and people just bought that stuff up. And I do not think that we would have heard from her, certainly not on this level, prior to the pandemic. I feel like there's this gap in people, and people who maybe don't know how to buy or don't know where to buy independent books may have gone for something more along the lines of what feels like the next 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight or something.
I mean, I've spoken to, especially because of the show, I've spoken to hundreds of authors in the last couple of years, and I know multiple authors who had deals with big traditional publishers. They had book tours. Of course, they were all canceled. They were shut down. They're like, oh God, because it took, they wrote the book in 2017 or 2018. They waited their 2 years or 2.5 years for it to come out. They had a whole thing planned, gone, shut down. Some of them have come back, and some of them never got their book tours reinitiated because the wave kind of passed them by. It was just, they did nothing wrong. It was just, unfortunate timing. And, the more I'm talking to people, there's this kind of this, we all want to kind of get back out there, but it's kind of like it's a stagger step way, because everyone's kind of figuring out how to get back out there and in a way that makes sense for them. All right, so let's stick on the publishing side for a minute. So given that the big 5 publishers, right, 5 at this point, have over time consolidated power and tend to only back just a handful of authors in a serious way, is what I mean. I mean, they buy lots of books, but they don't really support a lot of them. Indie, small press, and self-publishing, Aaron, you mentioned this, have become a bigger and bigger faction within the overall publishing landscape. Now, the advantages within indie press and self-publishing is that you have more control over your work and you get more hands-on collaboration. The downside is that the infrastructures, the small press or your own, are seriously limited compared to what the bigger publishers can do, getting into bookstores, libraries, arranging national book tours, and the like. So when you're small press, the available resources are also small. And given that there's a massive delta between the big and the small, how are you navigating that landscape? What kind of publishers are you working with today? Who do you want to work with? And what are they telling you about what they're willing to back and how much of your work, if any, is small or indie press? Alex, kind of where are you at?
So I am with our commander, Kasich Press, which is a relatively small publisher, but they're quickly growing, and they're, from the time I started working with them until today, they kind of went from, the typical small press if you find in the dealer's room at conventions to an actual company that gets all their books carried by Barnes and Noble and all the agents, submitting their manuscripts to them like they do to like Daw and Bain and all, publishers at that level. So they've been really good to work with. They're very responsive. They're still small enough that you talk to everybody in the company all the way up to the big boss, and they've been really, really wonderful to work with. But in terms of advice that I give to people who are trying to sell their books or trying to publish their book, is you start at the top. And it's absolutely true, like you pointed out, that a large publisher may drop the ball and not promote your book very well, and that's every writer's kind of like nightmare, and we'll all live in fear of it. But they also might, and so if they do, you're winning the lottery at that point. You're winning the writer's lottery, and you want to at least buy the ticket to the writer's lottery. Whereas if you're going with the smaller the press that you're going with, the lower kind of your upside is. I mean, you have to work that much harder for a relatively smaller upside. Of course, there are exceptions that prove that prove the rule. There are very, very successful self-publishers, but they are a tiny, tiny fraction of the industry. And so try starting at the top, go down to the mid-sized publishers, and if you can't sell your book there and you feel like you can take on all the marketing work and kind of do the hustle, then self-publishing is just fine, or a small press is just fine. But there's for my money, there's no reason not to start by submitting to the biggest and publishers with the largest reach and the largest marketing budget.
I used to give the exact same advice, and I think that I don't think I can give that advice to people anymore. And the reason why is not because you're wrong, because like I said, I used to say the exact same thing, and I still think that, yeah, if you have the opportunity, go for it. But I think the problem that I've realized is that, to be blunt, most people aren't like me. I mean, I write multiple novels a year. That's not the case for most people. So, for a lot of people, if they have one novel and they've spent years working on one novel and they send it out to a big publisher, they send it out to HarperCollins or Del Rey or somebody, it's going to take them a year to even hear back, at best, if they're lucky. And that's a year where they're sitting, and in most people's cases, they're not working on the next novel because they don't know, they haven't shifted yet. They haven't transitioned from, I have a novel done, now I need to write another novel. And in a lot of cases, it's because they're waiting to hear back and see if that novel is going to be the first book in a series, or what's going to happen with it. And so in those cases, I honestly would tell people at this point, go for the mid-size, go for the smaller, because you'll hear back in weeks potentially. And you know what? You won't get the marketing budget. You won't get, you won't necessarily get into the libraries. You won't automatically be in Barnes and Noble, but you'll know in a few weeks' time, and then you can decide. Now for anybody who has like multiple books, I'll say, yeah, absolutely, send one off to the big publisher. While you send that one off to the big publisher, send another off to a smaller press, or start working on your next novel. That's great. But if you've got the one, you put all your eggs in that one basket. It's tough to wait for 1.5 to 2 years to 3 years, during lockdown to 3 to 4 years to hear back if they're even going to pick it up. I mean, Randy, you must have dealt with some of that, because even though they were interested, right, you then had this gap.
Yeah, so I don't like to disagree with the publishing professionals here. I think everybody has their own unique story. I have an agent who's with Jabberwocky, which is one of the bigger literary agencies, especially for spec fic, and she did not have to wait 6 months or a year to hear back on. She has sent out 3 different novels. Tune In Tomorrow is my 3rd novel with my agent, the first one that got published. And we did not have to wait that long to hear back. Now, that either means they really hated it and just wanted to get it out of their office, or it meant that there was never that long of a gap. I mean, I've been with her since, I want to say, 2017, 2018, 2019. And in that time period, we've had 3 novels that have gone through the process. So there really wasn't that need to have to wait that long from the big presses. The thing is that I'm kind of where I am right now is I have Tune In Tomorrow came out on Solaris, which is the publishing imprint for Rebellion, which largely does more things that are comics or games based, and they're based in Oxford, England. So, they have a lot of prestige over there, but I think they're lesser known over here, but they do then distribute through Simon and Schuster over here. So it's all sounded like a pretty good package. It was kind of a large indie that was going to distribute to Simon and Schuster, but the pandemic leftovers, the lack of paper, et cetera, proved that it was a difficult thing to get into bookstores. And my question for my agent has been recently, so I'm working on the next book it's not literally in the series, but in this umbrella universe. I have another book that will be ready to be looked at. If Solaris doesn't want it, where do we send it next? Like, should we just take it directly to other indies? Should we show it to bigger places? And the thing that she constantly says to me, because I want to go to more indies. I have these 2 other novels that didn't make it through the really big presses, but I think indies would really do well with, or at least small presses. But what she says to me is that they're always going to look at how much you sold on your last book.
Yep.
So if you don't go to somebody on the bigger end of things who has the potential to sell tens or hundreds of thousands of copies to get that high bar, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a small return. It may be faster, you may get more things published, and all that's good, but I think that you're setting yourself up for a smaller bar, which means that it makes it even harder to get the next book with a larger press who might be able to do more. So for me, I'm leaning more into what Alex has said, which is starting at the top, working our way down to the more likely places. And then if those places don't find that it's for them, then, smaller presses or indie presses is the way to go, because my main concern is there's prestige factor in a larger publisher that people have already heard of. And then there's the potential for greater sales, which then affects your ability to get published next time. So this is kind of the quandary I'm in right now.
All right, just a quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box. We'll get to a few at the end. I got one question. I have so many more questions we're just not going to have time to get to, but one last question before we go into some other things. So as the pandemic mostly fades away and you look ahead, how are you looking at the publishing landscape? Do you feel optimistic, pessimistic, or somewhere in between? Aaron?
I personally, or just in general, I mean,
Both.
Personally,
Both.
relatively optimistic. I have homes for all of my books I'm working on now. I have publishers that I work with. I mean, I work with like 5 different publishers at this point. So, I can find a home for pretty much anything I'm writing. I have people who've asked me for, sequels to various books, at least 3 of which I'm working on this year. I think things are pretty good right now, honestly, for me. For publishing in general, like I said, it's going to be an interesting time. It's an interesting transitional period. I think that indie presses and small presses have an opportunity here to really take advantage of some of this, because like Randy said, big publishing is a slow ship. Small presses are little, speedy little boats, can easily dart around them. And this is a chance to get out in front for some of them. And some of them have already taken that, and some of them are already running with it, and it's great to see that, because it's great to see people with passion and enthusiasm for writing, for publishing, doing well, getting good books out there, getting people excited about it. And I like to think that we're going to see more of that. I like to think that that's going to continue. You're never going to sink the big ships. I mean, the big ships are going to be there, but that's fine. Those big ships will continue lumbering along, and little boats can zoom in and out and, make some nice little ways for themselves.
All right, Alex, what do you think?
I'm very optimistic going forward, not just because the pandemic is ending, but in general, the trends have been good. The independent bookstores have been coming back. You see more and more bookstores surviving and even thriving, which is great. Barnes and Noble, which we've long thought was going to go out of business like any day now, seems to be recovering somewhat. Amazon is obviously doing bonkers, doing really, really well with book sales. All sorts of new venues are popping up for audiobook sales that are going to compete with Audible, which is competition is always good for the consumer, and it's good for the authors as well. So it'll bring more listeners into the field. Spotify is doing audiobooks now, who is actually my audiobook publisher, so I kind of have to give them a plug there. But they are, so they're entering that space, as are many others. So I think that the market in general is growing, and anytime the market is growing significantly, anybody who is publishing good material is going to benefit, whether it's the big publishers or the smaller, more agile presses that Aaron is talking about. I think we're all going to see positive results. And of course, rounding back to what you were saying earlier, the conventions are coming back, so we can go and we can see those fans of ours that'll buy everything we put out. They finally get to see our face again, hopefully eventually without a mask. And then they get to see it and buy our books.
All right, that was great. But now it's a time for a special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Moving Day, Quantum Leap, Animal Planet, Name That Quote, Ghost in the Attic, Join the Cast, and of course, everyone's new favorite, Kick 'em in the Junk. All right, Randy, you're new on the show, so you're going to be first up. You ready?
All right.
All right.
Big money, big money, big money.
That's right. No whammies. What do we got? For you,
Oh,
we
sure.
got Ghost in the Attic. All right.
Ooh,
The
okay.
first time I've ever had this one on the show. All right. There's a ghost in your attic. The ghost isn't necessarily mean or scary, but could be, but it freaks people out because ghosts know things about the afterlife. And let's face it, they're a ghost. And the ghost in your attic knows everything that you do. They see all. So you never truly have privacy. Then again, you have access to your very own ghost. You can either allow the ghost to live with you permanently or send them to find a new house. Do you let the ghost stay or do you kick them out?
Oh, hell yeah. I want a ghost. I want to, I love that idea. If this ghost is not like malevolent and going to be, scaring all my guests or scaring the dog all the time, that ghost can come in, have a seat. That's a point of inspiration for me. I'm take the ghost.
All right. Pro ghost. All right. Alex, you ready?
Sure.
All right. Here we go. Let's see what we got. No whammies. And for Alex, you got Quantum Leap. All right. I always like this one. All right. You have voluntarily stepped into the particle accelerator. If you could go back to any point within your own lifetime and fix a moment you thought went wrong, either in your life or in the life of someone else, where would you go and for what purpose?
All right, so I'm gonna forego the obvious. Let's go back and buy Bitcoin / Apple stock.
No, I'm not talking about going back and buying Google for 5 cents. Something that went wrong either in your life or someone else's life that you want to fix.
All right. Well, I've talked about it before many times, and it was my general fear and reluctance to start writing because English is my third language, and I've waited many, many years to finally begin writing fiction in English. And many times I think back on that, and I wish that I started on this journey at least a decade earlier. So that's what I would have done. I would have nudged myself to get into the creative game much earlier in life.
Fair enough. All right, Aaron, you're up.
Okay.
What do we got? Let's see. And we don't do duplicates, so you're gonna get something new. Okay, name that quote. Oh, I like this one. All right, you ready? I'm gonna name a quote. You tell me what it's from.
Okay.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow? There wasn't one today.
I have no idea.
Anyone?
Groundhog Day?
That's it. Bill Murray is Bill Connor from Groundhog. Right.
There we go.
He pulled it out at the last.
Look at that.
I love it. All right. Nice job. Okay. So now we're going to pick your poison. I have 4 choices that you get, A, B, C, or D. I'm not going to tell you what they are. You're going to pick at random. Alex, you're up.
Let's go with A. Just start at the top of the list.
Okay. This is one of my new favorites, the spoiler scenario. Okay, spoilers have become an inevitable part of fandom. Personally, and anyone who knows me knows this by now, I despise spoilers in all forms. I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. But not everybody feels the same. What do you think about spoilers, and is there a preferred etiquette about how to handle them?
So I prefer not to get stuff spoiled for me. which means that I travel, use the quantum leap accelerator to travel forward in time and watch all the shows ahead of everybody else.
Mhm.
As far as the etiquette, I think it's only reasonable to not post pictures or text about something that everybody's watching up front and just say, hey, I'm going to discuss the show in the comments. If you want to read it, join me in the comments on my Facebook post or whatever, and that's where the discussion is going to take place. So try not to make it too obvious, to give people just enough time to make a decision to avert their eyes.
All right, fair enough. Okay, Randy, you're up. So that was A's off the board. So you got B, C, or D?
Oh, C is for cookie, man. That's good enough for me.
C is for cookie. Okay.
Oh, my first two choices both gone.
All right, so I'm going to give you some truth serum. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. You ready?
Okay.
Favorite flavor ice cream?
Mint chocolate chip.
What's one food you will never eat ever for any reason?
Kimchi.
Bucket list destination anywhere in the world?
New Zealand.
Oh, been there. It's great. Scariest movie you ever saw?
At the time, Blair Witch Project.
Okay. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Flying.
Do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one if you could?
I play the piano, but I don't own a piano, so I don't play it frequently. If I could, I would love to rock out on the guitar.
Fair enough. All right. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Okay. Favorite cocktail? And if you don't drink, your go-to unwind beverage?
Favorite cocktail, whiskey.
Whiskey.
Does that count? It's a straight thing. Do I gotta get a mixed drink?
No, whatever.
Okay.
Okay.
Whiskey one cube.
All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever, any seat, any venue, any time in history. What's your choice?
Oh man, this is going to sound really tacky, but I was actually just talking about somebody this the other day. I really want to see the British version of the musical Chess that came out in the 80s.
I've seen it. I saw
Wait,
it. I saw it in Edinburgh.
Oh, then I love you. We have to have a conversation. I saw the American version. It was terrible.
Oh,
So-
British version was great.
Okay, so there you go. Front row, or seventh.
Never even heard of it. Okay. If you could bring back one TV show you feel was canceled too soon to continue its run, what would it be?
I was a really big fan of the show Fame. Again, back to the 80s. I was so sad when it got canceled.
All right, fair enough. All right, Aaron, you're up. So you've got B,
Like a B or D, right?
B or D.
We'll go with B.
All
Sure.
right, so old dog, new tricks. The saying goes that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, yet every writer I know, including myself, has made numerous mistakes along the way in their writing careers. What's one mistake you made that hurt like hell at the time, but you learned from and endeavored never to do again?
Probably the biggest mistake I made was, and I it's pretty much shaped the rest of my career. I long time ago, fortunately, I screwed up a deadline, and I didn't want to own up to it, and I just kept basically not responding to my editor at the time, and then eventually had to sort of own up to it and crash through it, and that taught me that, one of the most important things in an editor-writer relationship is communication. The minute you think anything might be causing a problem, you immediately contact your editor or your publisher and you talk to them about it, because the absolute worst thing you can do is flake like that, leave them hanging, screw yourself over. It's just absolutely, it's the worst thing in the world. And that's one thing I would absolutely go back and fix if I had that time machine. But I've never flubbed a deadline since.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, just blowing off your editor, your publisher, is never going to end well for you.
Yeah.
All right, no, fair enough. And no one likes to get caught, knowing that they made a mistake.
No, I was young and I was
Right.
stupid, and
Right.
yep.
As we all were, and some of us still are, but who knows? I don't know if it's young or stupid or maybe both, but no, probably not young. Okay, all right, we're gonna take some questions for a minute. I got one here, open question. Okay, here's one. Neil Clark in his post this week cited the pandemic supposedly leading to an increase in spammy submissions, which contributed to his closing Clark's World. Based on what you've seen and experienced, would you agree with what he saw and did?
So it wasn't really the pandemic. It was the chat
AI.
and similar services that are generating stories. And
I'm sorry, it was what?
Chat GPT, like that.
Oh, yeah.
That are generating the really bad stories and all the tech bros that think that it's a get rich quick scheme. And that's what Neil is dealing with. And the big problem for him is that any conceivable solution to that would also lock out or make it more difficult for the newer authors to submit, which is an unacceptable thing for him, thankfully. So that's really the problem, but it has nothing to do with the pandemic.
There's nothing funny about what's been going on with Neil and all that, but I have been chuckling at the whole idea of anybody thinking writing is a get rich quick scheme. I mean, you know, these are just people who clearly do not know the business.
Yeah. They've been watching too many of those movies where the person writes the one book and then sells it for $1 gazillion.
Yes, and it's out 6 months after
Well,
they
are you
finish the
kidding?
last page. Yeah.
With me and all my millions down here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so we got a couple more minutes. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to hear about some good stuff from our panel. So just give me 1 second. All right, and then we're going to do this and we're going to share. Okay, so Aaron, what do we got here? Talk to me.
So this is my latest book. Came out at the start of this month. I wrote it during the pandemic, in fact. It's called Yeti Left Home, as you can see. It's the first book in a series about a mild-mannered Yeti who lives upstate in Minnesota, and then basically gets scared out of his home and winds up in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. He thinks he's just going to hide out amongst all the regular folk and discovers an entire thriving supernatural community there. He's always been a loner. He's always been, you know, off on his own, just trying to lay low and, you know, hope nothing happens. And for the first time ever, finds himself around other supernaturals, making friends, making enemies, making waves. This book was a hell of a lot of fun to write. It's also, you know, talking about some of the ups and downs we've had. This is the first book where I have actually had a review in Publishers Weekly, which fortunately was very positive. They liked it. But so that was, you know, kind of a real professional milestone for me.
All right.
Yep.
Well done. All right, folks. If you like good fun, Yeti's your man. All right. All right, Randy, what do we got talking about? Because this doesn't look fun, like, at all.
Oh, no, not at all. When they showed me this cover, I'm like, it's loud, it's garish, it's perfect.
Right. So basically, this is a Game of Thrones spinoff, is what we're talking about.
Precisely, exactly. So Tune In Tomorrow is about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures, for mythical creatures, but starring humans. And all my entertainment industry background went in here. I know about how the sausage gets made. I know about the shenanigans. I will not verify or deny that anybody in this book is inspired by real people, but you never know. And one of the things I wanted to comment about all three of these books that I love is that we're all writing about sort of hidden behind the scenes fantasy communities kind of thing. I love this. So anyway, yeah, I did get a nice review in Publishers Weekly. They said, if you like Douglas Adams, if you like Terry Pratchett, you like this book. I would not personally say those things because that would be hubris, but Publishers Weekly said it. So.
All right, very good. All right, good stuff. All right, Alex, you talked about it a little bit before. What do we got here?
I'm going to complete the Publishers Weekly favorable review trifecta here.
Nice.
So this is an urban fantasy book, and it's the first in the series. The second will be coming out this September. And it's about this group of people, primarily the main character, Conrad Brent, in the front. And they use magic to protect the citizens of New York City, and particularly Brooklyn, from all threats, magical and monsters and other supernatural nasty things. The twist being is that the main character has no magic whatsoever, and he is forced to hide that fact, or he will very likely be killed with extreme prejudice. So he has to do, he basically has to be Batman, but without anybody knowing that he has no superpowers.
So basically, this is based on your life.
I will either confirm or deny.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Look, it looks great. So, guys, 3 great books. You got to go get them if you want fun. And since we're talking about fun, I figured I'd dust off an oldie but a goodie. And we're going to make it a quintet, because this is Finders Keepers, actually my first novel that came out, which Publishers Weekly also gave a shout out to. So we got 4 Publisher Weekly reviews here. So full disclosure about this book. So Finders Keepers, and there's 3 books in the series. It's Finders Keepers, there's Genius to Milo, and Astropalooza. Now, this book is loosely based on a series of backpacking trips that I actually took. So this guy right here, well, that's me back when I actually had, hair. And I'm not bald, by the way. I actually shaved my head, but at least that's my story and I'm sticking with it. And this is my buddy Carl, based on my buddy from New Zealand. And it's based on, so it's 2 guys who are, it's sort of like if Bill and Ted meets Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You got these 2 knuckleheads who are running around Europe, and their big worry is, can I get the girl? Can I capture my train to Amsterdam? I'm hungover again. Meanwhile, the fate of the universe is hanging in the balance, and they're at the center of it, but only they don't know it. And this is the said jar of the universe's DNA, which is what they are kind of running around with, but don't necessarily know what they have. And they're being hunted down throughout Europe by a cast of characters, which I actually figured I'd show you now. So we got Lex, who he's up from a galactic realm. He was banished. This is to Earth. This is before he was banished. That's after. And this is actually a direct quote from the novel. And we've got some biker gangs, and we've got a galactic talk show host, and we've got that's Emma, again, before banishment, after. This is one of my favorites. This was George. This is a drag queen out in Amsterdam, and Hank, who's actually based on as a waiter, based on a real guy who I was a waiter with, who was a big character who used to be a CEO of corporations. Then he took a lot of mushrooms. Well, anyway, so it was kind of wild fun. But in full disclosure, when I wrote this book, it was at a time in the world where things like American Pie and Superbad were really popular, and I kind of wrote it for that audience. But the fact is, the world changed dramatically culturally, and with the Me Too movement and more so. So I updated it a couple of years ago to call this the definitive edition. But then even after that, the world kept moving even farther away. So I'm going to be straight up. It's a little bit raunchy, if you're okay with that kind of thing. But the second 2 books, which I wrote back to back, Genius to Milo and Astropalooza, are not really. And basically, it's one long book in 2 parts. I had just a load of fun with it. And I mean, it's kind of wild and wacky and crazy, and the fate of the universe is really hanging in the balance with every single book. You can get all these books are published by Crazy 8 Press, and they're available on Amazon. And if you want a good time, I encourage you to check them out. All right, folks, this was great. That's our show. I want to thank our guests for coming on. Thank you, Randy and Alex and Aaron, for coming around and talking to us about what's going on in the world and sharing your books with us. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. Thanks again. I hope everybody is well and being well and staying well. And as always, I will see you guys next week. All right, take care.
Bye, guys.
All right, guys.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Be good, and as always, to be continued. I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye now.